Hello there. I'm just going to do the part 2, the final part, I think, of a response video to the Channel 5 documentary, recent documentary about Lucy Letby. So where had I got to? Mark McDonald's contributions throughout, very, very good. And there's a really good interview with him on YouTube, like about a 50-minute interview with him, in which is kind of done at a really nice pace, in which he goes through things in much greater detail about his view of the legal system and where it can fall down, the justice system, sorry, I should say. But, he makes a point in the Channel 5 documentary about the Court of Appeal getting it wrong, and he says quite often. Be interesting to know how often. I don't know, there's probably studies out there how often, and even if there are studies, how would we know how often they get it wrong? If the times that they get it wrong and it isn't rectified, we just don't know how many times that, in other words, when somebody's brought an appeal and it's just not accepted, and a person serves their sentence and they had been innocent, or is still in prison now and they're innocent. So we just don't know the figures. But he, from his perspective, he's saying it's at least quite often. I wonder what quite often means. Is it more often than not? I don't know. Quite often. And he's talked about how Lucy was clearly let down by having no defence experts, albeit, she did have one, didn't she? But he wasn't called. And he sort of says, well, Mark McDonald says, it was like an inevitable outcome of not having these any experts really for the jury seeing the prosecution with all those alleged, apparent experts, apparently impartial experts. Well, that's another story, isn't it? What they actually are. Really interesting part of the documentary with Dr. Waney. I don't know if it's Squire or Squire. Squire, I'll say Squire. She's a paediatric neuropathologist. And I think Mark McDonald, KC, mentioned her actually in that extended interview that he did on YouTube with a YouTuber. She was accused of dishonesty, she was struck off by the GMC, but eventually reinstated on appeal. I think if it's the same person, I believe it is, that Mark McDonald mentioned in that extended interview, that she didn't work again after that. I'm not sure if that is strictly true, or if it is her, if it is Dr. Waney Squire, because he didn't mention her by name in that interview. He just said it was a doctor that had worked at, I think it could well be her, who had worked at John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. The irony is that, well, is it more than an irony? The bitter irony is that, Dr. Waney Squire was struck off, at least initially, by the GMC, and yet you've got Evans and his absurd claims, which have got no scientific basis at all, and he's allowed to come and go with his registration to practice, and GMC have got no problem with him at all. So there you go, that's saying a lot about them, isn't it? About the GMC. Whereas you've got Dr. Waney Squire here actually sticking to scientific principles, whereas Evans is making everything up out of whole cloth according to his whim. But his whim for a very particular reason, for the job he's been asked to do. And he's very happy to do, which is to create the case for the police and the prosecution in the most corrupt way possible. And we're just not going to ever find out how corrupt it is overtly, but the inferences I draw from everything I've read and heard and seen about this is that the collusion and the corruption is beyond measure. Dr. Waney Squire quotes in the Channel 5 documentary, she says that the situation is worse in this country than in many other places. in terms of what can happen to you as a medical professional if you decide to go against the mainstream view, as she terms it, i.e. go against the prosecution witnesses. So in her case it was to do with like shaken baby syndrome, so called, I think. And I just wondered, why is it worse here than in so many other places? And I think the main conclusion I draw from that is because of the nature and the actuality of the NHS, and obviously the GMC being part of the sort of attendant or related part of that, and the power of those institutions and how they're thought of, the corporate power of them and the way they react, and the way they can terrorize their employees, essentially, if they decide to. They'll monster anybody who acts for the defence, who acts in an honourable way, and they'll just punish them, as they did with Dr Wayne Squire, and turn their lives upside down, disrupt their lives completely. We're getting towards the end of the documentary now, and they start doing these kind of like quotes on the screen, don't they, in the last few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes. The defence counsel declined to comment. Why is that? Is that because they're still on some kind of retainer? Are they still under some kind of contract to work for Lucy Letby and her family? I don't know. Maybe they know they've either acted incompetently or something worse. Incompetence or something worse. I don't know. I'm not saying it is, but I think it's reasonable to, at the very least, question their decision-making and competence at the very least, and I don't think it's unreasonable to, not to state it as a matter of fact, but to ask the question. Yeah, to ask the question whether there's more to it than a failure of competence and bad decision making. Cheshire Police, no comment. These are these bits of writing that come up, the quotes that come up at the end of the Channel 5 documentary. As, quote, further investigations continue, see, well, they can only go forward. They're trying to double, triple down on this because they know the narrative is changing. The narrative is turning. They know that, and that's their only recourse now, is to push it further. As it is, there was a Times article yesterday which was awful, bad writing, awfully written, bad attitude, bad spirit behind it, which was so begrudging in terms of this changing narrative. A Times article came out yesterday, just horrible read. And the attitude is that they don't like this changing narrative now. They want the old story back, and they want to subtly or otherwise undermine all the challenges to the original narrative of the quote unquote serial killer. Where was I here? So yeah, the Cheshire Police saying they're doing further, quote unquote, further investigations, including a review into the COCH and the Liverpool Women's Hospital. Right, is that because was she on secondment there or something like that? Is that the reason why they're saying that? So they're doing that thing where Evans was tasked to go right back through Lucy Letby's whole history since she qualified as a nurse, and perhaps even on during her training, because that's the only direction of flow they can go, is to keep trying to add more. The police are allegedly looking into corporate manslaughter in relation to the Countess of Chester Hospital, but that's on the basis that they're saying that the hospital let the parents down and let the babies down by not finding or ascertaining that there was a serial killer there earlier on. It's just all bizarre and wicked. And then you've got all Evans's quotes in the documentary at the end, which is just a litany of rubbish, really. Very, very noteworthy that he didn't wish to appear. I'm sure, because he was everywhere. He was all over the media like a rash, wasn't he? He was like a rash everywhere that would have him after the trial last year, and subsequently, and inviting people to his home. Liz Hull and the other character for the Daily Mail podcast, the other hack, the two hacks came to his home, and his beautiful home. I was given tea and biscuits, no doubt, and but he didn't want to appear here because he knows it's turning, but he obviously had to say something, or felt he had to say something, and they gave his quotes here. Nonsense like regarding injecting the air into the stomach through these very tiny tubes, which is being challenged by many, many people now with medical experience and qualifications. So it's all falling apart for him. It's been blown out the water, these theories, and every element of what he's said and the way he's trying to justify it, everything he said now is going to be under scrutiny by so many people, under public scrutiny, because we've got this freedom of reporting about it now. And many more people are working on every element of his theorising, his hypotheses are falling apart in real time, even more than they have already. He just made it all up, basically, to help the police and the NHS create this case around scapegoated innocent person. He states that CPAP doesn't have the same destabilising effect as forcing air into the stomach. But as I say, I'm just repeating here, his evidence is going to be ripped to pieces ongoing, and is being ripped to pieces. And Dr McConville's doing a lot of that on his podcast, and did prior on the podcast that he did with Peter Elston. We Need to Talk About Lucy Letby podcast, which had about 20-something installments, and then I think Dr McConville's up to about 7 or 8 installments. I've got to catch up with those myself. Just looking at my note, I'm referring to my notes here. Yeah, it's kind of the world according to Evans, really, which is a reprise of the world according to Southall and Meadow before, that they create these theories, and it's just out of their heads, really, and they're later seen in the cases of Southall and Meadow to be completely without any scientific basis. But these things keep repeating. This is the danger, and people's lives are destroyed by these. I was going to say monsters, but I don't know what they are. I don't know what people like that. They're narcissists, all three of them. Southall, Meadow, and Evans. That's what they share in common straight away. Narcissists, frauds, arrogance like you wouldn't believe, to destroy people's lives. He's going to join the list of Southall and Meadow, and there'll be others there, and Dr Ward Platt is another one, but he's passed away now. Evans says he actually had 18 other references. So what does that mean? He looked on Google for an hour. So all those other references are going to be minutely looked at in terms of his claims, and to see how they match up, by people who are medically trained, really, and scientifically trained, and probably are being already. So just because you say, I've got 18 other references, well, people are going to look into all of what they are, if it's publicly available, what those references are, which I hope they are available. That if his main one that was cited in the court was the Shoo Lee paper, Shoo Lee and other writers of that paper, that Shoo Lee himself, the writer, said, well, you've misused my paper here to fabricate this evidence, to build this story, that you've misused it. That doesn't hold out much hope for the other 18 references, does it? If his leading one was shown to be, by the writer of the paper itself, Shoo Lee, or at least one of the writers, to be a misuse of that research or paper. I know Dr. McConville doesn't like it being called a paper, but anyway, it was cited as a part of the prosecution's case, you know, to back up Evans's theory and to back up the later statements of the consultants with regard to this rash, in which the consultant's memory had improved over time, and everyone got on the same page, the nurses and the consultants, and they all seemingly began to remember all very much the same, identically this rash, whereas there were no contemporaneous notes about it. But years later, they all get on the same page and all say the same description, but that description wasn't as per the Shoo Lee et al. Paper. I'm just reading my notes here. Yeah, so he's abusing the Shoo Lee paper, essentially, as did the whole prosecution case. There's no explanation given by Evans for why Shoo Lee disagrees with Evans. You got Evans saying, well, I don't care what Shoo Lee says, I still think I'm right. I know the paper better than he does. I know we'll call it paper just for argument's sake. I call the article, the paper, better than he does, better than the writer of it does. Evans says, you shouldn't diagnose the embolism by means of, I can't remember the exact phrase he uses, but by means of discounting, so other things, other possibilities. So and that's exactly what they did. There's another phrase that he said which is quite neatly wraps it up rather than what I'm trying to do, but you shouldn't make the diagnosis of air embolism by exclusion, by a process of exclusion, which is exactly what they did. It wasn't this, therefore it has to be air embolism. But again, Evans tries to say, well, I don't care what you think about that, I'm doing it anyway, it doesn't matter. But it will be not just Shoo Lee's view, but X number of other people now involved in it, medical backgrounds, just saying, everything you're saying, Evans, is unsubstantiated from a scientific or medical point of view, as Dr. Dimitrova has been saying. Everything is implausible. That Evans's evidence, quite hard to say, Evans's evidence is implausible, and she says that's a polite way of putting it. You can imagine what she'd actually want to say, implausible, but in a less polite way. What have I written here? Yeah, no contemporaneous notes have gone there. Memory improving over time of all the witnesses, i.e. the doctors. And this issue about how Jayaram comes across the same paper and then Evans does, what kind of communications were there between them so that they all decide, well, that's what we're gonna hang it on. We'll hang it on this paper to base it on, to kind of construct this framing of an innocent person. And not only they hang it on that paper, but then they abuse the reality of that paper and what it's saying to shoehorn it in, to make it fit their mad theories of a murderer being there. So somebody with a medical background needs to go through those other 18 references and take those apart. Perhaps they're doing that already. I hope it's happening. Are they available? I've written here those other references. Perhaps they are. I hope they are. I think I've got notes here that I've already said about here. Yeah, they keep doubling down. He's just you get a sense of Evans's statements here, that how weak they are, how weak and almost plaintive they are. And look, I did my homework. Oh, I used Google I did my homework. I've got 18 other references. Isn't just the Shoo Lee paper. Compare that to what you've even seen in this relatively short documentary, and compare that to what's coming out in other articles, compare it to what Dr McConville and Dr Scott McLachlan is saying, the detail in which they go into, and other people as well, Sarita Adams, Science on Trial, Richard Gill, all the people that are involved in this with the relevant professional backgrounds. Compare that to these plaintive bleatings that you see from Evans at the end of that Channel 5 documentary. You can feel and hear that he knows he's being rumbled and has been rumbled already, and it's just about how we formalise that, how it's formalised going forward, and how it can then be him being rumbled in this way in terms of him being a complete fraud, is how you interject that into the justice system, if it'll allow it, this corrupt justice system, so that he is in the forum of a court, his evidence is ripped to pieces by relevant actual experts using a scientific method to saying that, you know, what you're saying here is implausible, and doing that in front of a second jury if it's a retrial, you know, or a set of judges. But can you find 3 honest judges that are going to allow that? Can you find anyone that's going to allow that within this corrupt justice system? And how do you get to that point? How do you get through the CCRC's willful, designed intention to stop justice being done as an organisation? You know, just as they're doing with the Colin Norris case. I think it's Colin Norris case, where they've had this vital evidence, and they've been sitting on it. I think it has been. There's this 3.5 year period in which this exculpatory evidence or new evidence has been shown, and nothing's happening. The appeal isn't happening. I think they eventually, CCRC, were forced essentially to recommend an appeal to the Court of Appeal, to say that, you know, you've got to appeal this, and the Court of Appeal just 3.5 years later, nothing's happened. I mean, that's disgusting. What's that phrase? Justice delayed is justice denied. It's worse than that. It's an ongoing crime, because if someone is innocent, then what's happening? A crime is being enacted upon them, isn't it? In other words, their liberty's taken and they're innocent. They're in a state of being kidnapped because they're not justifiably incarcerated. So an ongoing crime is of being allowed to be extended day on day with a kind of insouciance, a kind of, well, yeah, well, maybe next year we'll have a look at it again. It's just despicable criminal behaviour. Well, an actual criminal behaviour in itself, to allow that to perpetuate. Sorry, I'm a bit unfocused today, I think. I'll try and get back into what I'm talking about. Yeah, how weak are Evans's plaintiff statements at the end. If you can feel, I believe this, feel this desperation under it. He knows the narrative turning against him, as it should do. He says, I had extensive, quote, hands-on experience of working with sick babies, but crucially, he was never a neonatologist, and he was long retired, getting on towards 2 decades of retirement, when he began making his, at the point he began making these corrupted and nonsense reports that he was paid for at a rate of £450 an hour, so we hear. He says he's provided, this is Evans again, he provided expert evidence for over 35 years. Yeah, so how much damage has he done in that time? How much damage has he done against people, against justice, against truth, against people's lives? You know, and just this irony, it's becoming a bit banal to keep repeating it perhaps, but he said himself in court that he declined. He was bashful about being called an expert, didn't want to be called an expert, said, oh, well, I don't like to be called an expert, that's a bit of a, I can't remember what he said, it's something like that's a bit too rich for me, or it's a bit too highfalutin. He didn't say highfalutin, but that was the vibe. He declined the descriptor of expert. Oh no, don't call me an expert. And yet he's providing, in his own words here, the Channel 5 documentary, I'm providing expert evidence. So I'm not an expert, but I'm providing expert evidence. How does that work out? Here's an interesting part here. He says, I'm still licensed to practice medicine. That's his quote in the Channel 5 documentary at the end. I am still licensed to practice medicine. People research this online, and on Twitter they said that he's lying. He's lying in that he's not currently licensed to practice medicine. I looked at the website myself as well, and also was sent a link by Catherine with a date, because there's sort of a subsection of the website which you can look at the history of registration. So thanks to Catherine for that. Thank you, Catherine. And on this GMC website, you can look yourself. You can see when he's licensed to practice, when it was on and off, when he had the license, when he didn't have the license. So it says on this GMC website that after the 1st of June of this year, 1st of June 2024, he was not, this is Evans, he was not licensed to practice. He was not licensed to practice after the 1st of June. So if this Channel 5 documentary asked him, and if he made this statement after the 1st of June 2024, then he is definitely lying. If he made it towards the end of May or the middle of May or sometime in May or what, for example, then he isn't technically lying when he made that statement. When it's broadcast, when the Channel 5 documentary is broadcast, he certainly did not have it, but it depends on what the date was that he was asked that by Channel 5, or what date he gave his answer, I suppose, to be honest about this. It depends when he was asked. Was it before the 1st of June this year? Because up to that date he was technically. But going through that, this history of his licensing, as it were, I thought it was very interesting to note right, so during the period that he's writing his reports, and he may have written other reports, because as it said in the Court of Appeal, a refusal of Lucy's attempt to get an appeal, to get leave for appeal, that was rejected by the Court of Appeal. It says, in a generalised way, it says Evans made a large number of reports, but we certainly know his initial reports in relation to the investigation, his main ones were made in 2017 and 2018. And during that period that he was making those reports, he was not licensed to practice as a doctor. He was not licensed. He was registered with the GMC, but not licensed to practice during those very important years when he's actually making the reports for the police. What the ramifications are of that, what they should be as vis-a-vis what they are, is an open question, really. I think it's very dodgy myself, but was he technically allowed to do that, i.e. not be a licensed to practice but yet act as an expert? Perhaps within that system, they seem to allow that kind of thing. But I just thought it was very interesting that during that salient period of report writing, he's not licensed, but he becomes licensed again. I think this is quite an interesting date as well. He becomes licensed again on the 16th of July 2019, which is a month and a bit after Lucy Letby is arrested for the second time. So Lucy Letby is arrested in 2018, then 2019 the second time. So Lucy Letby is arrested on the 10th of June. She's first arrested 6th of July 2018, and the second time arrested on the 10th of June 2019 and bailed for the second. She's bailed for the second time. And then Evans registers to have a license to practice on the 16th July 2019. So a month and a bit after Lucy's second arrest. And he keeps that registration and license to practice up until the 1st of June 2024. So it sees him through the building of this fabricated, corrupted police case against Lucy and throughout the whole prosecution's case in the 10-month trial, and sees him up to the 1st of June. And then he's not licensed from the 1st of June. So yeah, we know it's David. He's, if you want to look at the GMC website, he's not under Dewey or Dowie. He's under David Richard Evans, and his year of qualification is 1971. You can check yourself on the GMC UK org website. I wrote a note here. Why would he lie about something that's so easy to check with regard to his registration? But to keep things fair, when was he asked that by the Channel 5 for his contribution? I'm imagining they wanted him on that programme, probably. I would have imagined they would have done. And he wasn't a bashful wallflower about appearing on the media last year. He would, turn up and, as he inserted himself in the inquiry and in the investigation anyway, he's somebody's not shy about... he's not backwards about coming forwards, I think, as the phrase goes, and he was all over the media like a rash. So, did he think he had to make a statement because he suspected or intuited what that Channel 5 documentary would be about, and he thought, well, I can't say nothing. Perhaps they wanted him to appear, but he thought, well, I don't want to appear here in case I've got to say things on the hoof. So maybe his way of, the best thing he could do for himself was to sort of make these statements, these kind of bland statements. But I think even though anything he says now will be taken apart, everything he says will be taken apart, every justification of what he's done will be taken apart going forward. But as I said many times, what we're missing with regard to Evans here is just the justifications he gave to decide that other cases were not unexpected and not unexplainable, i.e. they were expected and explainable, which were the majority of the deaths, up to 2/3, potentially 2/3, depending on how many deaths there were over 2015, 2016. This June to June period, as I said before, is an arbitrary selection of time. Why would you choose that period of time? Why would you stop in an open investigation in which the SIO or the Detective Hughes, if he was the SIO, or certainly one of the major figures in Hummingbird, if he says we're looking at anything and anyone, why would you bookend this period of time, ending it in June 21? Is it because something on the screen? You know that Lucy Letby is off the unit in July, which suggests you're not looking at anyone or anything, isn't it? It's just so obvious. Why wasn't Evans interested in the August 2016 death? What was the nature of that death? What was the nature of all the other deaths? What were the post-mortems there? What did they say, Why did George Kakai get it wrong? 6 out of 7 wrong. 6 out of 7 post-mortems for the deaths that end up on the indictment. But presumably, if any other post-mortems were done, we're assuming he gets it right all the other times. It's just all bizarre. The idea, Evans says, I've done this over the whole last year of videos, that Evans says he doesn't know who Lucy Letby was. It's just all lies, absolute lies. Can we prove explicitly that he's lying about that? Probably not, but maybe there's a way we can, if somebody speaks about it, if we get some whistleblowers from certain organisations. He said, I knew somebody was in the frame, but, all the cases in 2017 that he's marking as suspicious, Lucy Letby's initials and or name itself, I don't know how she signed off, are all over the medical notes as the most salient nurse name that he's coming across. So it's just nonsense. He's saying, he's seeing it in all the medical notes. And he didn't need to look at the August 2016 death because he knew that only one person was under consideration before he looked at any of the notes. But I think, and as I said all along, I think there was massive collusion between him and the certain people at Countess of Chester Hospital, i.e. one or two or more of the consultants before he even intruded himself into the investigation or put himself up as a gun for hire by saying, "This sounds like my kind of case." I think he knew. Again, it's about proving it. I think he knew. I think he had a lot of inside track information from certain people, perhaps Breary, perhaps Jayaram, perhaps both of them. They would be my two main candidates for getting information to. Breary and Jayaram would be my two main candidates for getting information to Evans prior to Evans's formal involvement in the police investigation as an alleged expert witness that isn't an expert and certainly isn't impartial. This is the thing about the interesting fact that the initial doctor that Evans chose, whether Evans chose him, suggested him, or it was chosen by the NCA, National Crime Agency, or by someone else, who knows who actually chose him, I don't think we know that yet, is this guy Dr Ward Platt. I used to call him Dr Wall Plant because I had only heard it orally and it sounded like Evans was saying wall plant, but it's Dr Ward Platt. I think it's Martin Ward Platt. Ward Platt is a double-barreled name, but I used to think he was called Wall Plant. He's a doctor that was based in, I don't know if he was from the northeast of England, but he was based in the northeast of England. He was the Bowen before Bowen existed in terms of this case. In other words, he was the person that was going to rubber stamp, and did rubber stamp, according to Evans at least, did rubber stamp Evans's reports and saying, yeah, you've got it all right here, I agree with everything you've said. We know that because Evans said that in interviews. His reports were initially sent to, again, not all the 33 cases out of which he chose a subset of 15, but just the 15 medical notes, sets of medical notes, and Evans's reports, i.e. already created as a subset, already cherry-picked for Dr Ward Platt, mixing up what I used to call him, Dr Ward Platt, who, according to Evans, said, yeah, you got it all right, Evans, got it spot on. He then didn't become the kind of backup for Evans because he died and obviously couldn't do it. But who is this Dr Ward Platt? He's only the person that backed up Roy Meadows' nonsense and lies and just crap in the miscarriage of justice concerning Angela Cannings, in which Roy Meadow ended up getting struck off. Why wasn't Dr Ward Platt struck off? That's who they chose. That was the go-to person to back up Evans, Ward Platt, who was part of the Roy Meadow team in the miscarriage of justice against Angela Cannings. Look up the Angela Cannings, if you don't know it, Angela Cannings case on Wikipedia, miscarriage of justice, Roy Meadow, another kind of Evans-like character. It was suggested by Roy Meadow and the prosecution that she'd murdered her two baby boys. It's obviously later shown she was exonerated, as overturned as a miscarriage of justice. But whoever chose him, whether Evans said, "Oh, I know a Dr Ward Platt. He sounds good. He's a good bet for it." Before Ward Platt dies, and then they choose Bowen, who's another safe bet. To rubber stamp him. Whoever chose him, whoever did that, they had to know of Dr Ward Platt's history and his relationship to the Angela Cannings case and miscarriage of justice. And yet they chose him. They chose him as the person to ratify and give the assessment of the medical notes and Evans's reports. So it's like their go-to team is like the worst bastard you can find. Who's the person that has been involved in an absolute major miscarriage of justice before, in which a woman was sent to prison for life for murder, and it was overturned as a miscarriage of justice? Yeah, we'll get that guy, Dr Ward Platt. We'll get Dr Ward Platt. So as I say, Meadow was later struck off. Why wasn't Ward Platt struck off? Why was he still available to be? But you know, Bowen is essentially another Ward Platt, and will be shown to be. In other words, but I'll get this right now. What Ward Platt was to Meadow vis-a-vis the Angela Cannings case, Bowen will be in relation to Evans in the Lucy Letby case. In other words, that you've got these two creeps that have just, you know, Bowen as a second fiddle, as it were, constructed this fake sort of fake medical backing and scientific, so-called scientific backing, medical backing, to ensure a miscarriage of justice here. And it was just sort of a replication of these earlier horrific miscarriages of justice. There's a CPS statement at the end of the documentary, which is just the usual bureaucratic rubbish, which I would summarise as saying, oh, we did the process. Yeah, we did the process. And there's a quote from them here which says, quote, evidence was subject to the toughest scrutiny, close quote. That's just simply a lie. It wasn't subject to the toughest scrutiny because there were no defence experts called whatsoever, so nothing was really scrutinised by someone that had the experience and the ability and the wherewithal to do it, and to do it in that forum in front of a jury, to challenge these hired gun prosecution experts who were just basically acting as a team just to push this through and to win at all costs. What have I put here? Yeah, that CPS thing is just lying, really. That's the way I'm going to put it, and that's what I believe. I'm saying what I believe. I'm saying what I believe. You know, with regard to the appeal and the prosecution evidence was flawed. It's not so much that it was flawed. It's just a load of made up rubbish. There's no evidence against Lucy Letby at all. Never has been. There isn't, and there never will be. It's the result of the collusion between the consultants, stroke NHS as a corporate body, Evans and the police, to get all on this, and plus these other hired gun experts for the prosecution, to get on the same page, to stitch someone up at all costs. Coming to the end now. Sorry if it's a bit long. The Channel 5 documentary says that it's episode 1, which suggests that there will be more to come, or they're leaving it open that there'll be more to come. Perhaps they're watching with interest and seeing what developments happen, and perhaps there's ideas about what you can. And certainly, if we're, as I believe we are, we're moving towards, very much, wholeheartedly believe we're moving towards an overturning of this miscarriage of justice, and the truth and justice being actually served here, then there will be more to come, clearly, and they'll want to do a follow-up. A final coda ending note here, as it were, is that I was very disappointed that the interview that Channel 5 recorded with Dr Scott McLachlan and Professor Norman Fenton was taken out at the last minute, I believe, of the documentary. They'd gone to Professor Norman Fenton's house to interview Dr Scott McLachlan, and Professor Norman Fenton did the interview and were very happy with it and were going to be part of the documentary, and then for reasons, I'm not going to go into them into this in this documentary, because you can find those reasons out yourself by looking at Professor Norman Fenton's website himself. He's got his own website. Put Professor Norman Fenton in Google, you'll find his website, and he does a blog post about that, a blog post about that removal by Channel 5 of their contribution, which I thought was a real a real shame and a real disappointment, really. And I can only hope that if there is a subsequent second part to this Channel 5 documentary, and it becomes sort of part of a series, or at least a two-parter, that they'll reinstate the interview that they did with Dr. Scott McLachlan and Professor Norman Fenton. Again, just another, as I've linked so many times in the past, please check out Dr. Scott McLachlan's Substack, which is, it's a Substack, so that's the main website, and the Substack is called At Law Health Tech, so that's one word, At Law Health Tech on Substack. And he's up to about, I think about 25, 26. I mean, he does Substacks about other subjects as well, very much so, but he's done about 25 or 26 Substack articles on the Lucy Letby case. I believe I've got to catch up with those as well. But he was doing them right back before the trial ended last year, so looking into all the aspects with regard to looking at each individual case, individual babies stay there, and having recourse to a lot of the trial transcripts, looking at each individual case and looking at all the signifiers of sepsis and all the other reasons why those, and looking at the insulin cases as well, so-called insulin cases, in great detail. So please look at Dr. Scott McLachlan's Substack, and all the other people that are doing so amazingly well. Dr. McConville. So I'm a bit tired today, so sometimes my memory goes for names. And Science on Trial website. Richard Gill, of course, who was brilliant in this Channel 5 documentary. Peter Elston and Dr. McConville's. Peter Elston's website, Mephitis. I don't want to miss anybody out, but there's so much. There's some brilliant commentators on Twitter, individual accounts that are looking into things. There's many of those. I won't start trying to name them all. There's loads of people there. Richard Gill's own website. I don't want to say things I'm not supposed to say that I've talked about in private groups of discussion, in case people are keeping their powder dry. But certainly what I will say is that there's belief or suggestion, or more than a suggestion, that there's another Guardian article to follow up the earlier one by Felicity Lawrence. Another Guardian, the article that we're waiting for, as it were. Maybe it's going through some legal process or something, or further research, but there's meant to be one that's going to be to be more revelatory, as it were. Maybe I kind of want to say a bombshell revelations, but we'll see what that is. But we're waiting for another big Guardian article. Another bit of information which I was told I could share is that the Royal Statistical Society is going to have a meeting or make a statement in mid-September. Sorry, I should have remembered exactly what that was. But it's either, I think they're going to make a statement in mid-September, because statistics were used by the prosecution. Well, they were abused. The concept of statistics were abused by the prosecution's case here, and obviously the police's case here. And so the RSS are continuing their involvement and their concern as to how statistical so-called evidence was given in this case, but it was really a misuse of statistics. And as statisticians have said, this is real schoolboy error stuff here. It's a very, very critically bad use of so-called statistical evidence, in which it was really an abuse of statistics, really, an abuse of it, an abuse of science, an abuse of so-called medical evidence, an abuse of the justice system as a whole, or albeit that the justice system as a whole is abusive in and of itself. So anyway, I'm rattling and rambling now, but that's the end of the part 2 of what I wanted to say about the Channel 5 documentary. I'm gonna keep my eyes open for any other things that come out. I don't think I was gonna look into that. I read the Times article that came out yesterday. I'm not going to do a video about that. There's a very kind of sour vibe about it. A begrudging, I think somebody else used that word, begrudging sense about it, that they realise that it's being challenged now and they kind of don't like it really. So the vibe about it is, oh yeah, but we know we've got to talk about it a little bit here, but we don't like it, and here's why we kind of still think they got it right and it was all above board, and it's just smells of desperation really, incredibly annoying. And having seen a couple of minutes of the northern editor of the Times, he seems like a complete idiot to me. That's just my personal view. I'm going to express it. There we are. Seems like an idiot to me, and can't bear to listen to that character. Again, seems wholly invested in the original story for some reason, some weird reason. They got no interest in the validity or otherwise of what's being said. They just want to cleave and hold on to the old story of the serial killer. It's doing something for them. They feel ashamed and concerned that they ran with that for so long, and they just don't want to make that turn. They just haven't got the honour or the decency to realise that they've been conned, and they would rather somebody stayed in prison for life rather than acknowledge that they're a bunch of idiots. Sorry, I'm just calling it as I see it. I'm talking about the Times editor there, complete knob. There we go. There's a few of them about. No doubt they think I'm a ghoul and a misfit, so we're on level peggings there. So anyway, there we are. That's the end of the video. Thank you for listening. If you have a great day and take care. Bye-bye.